Hello everyone, welcome back to Real Life. I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you like my vintage episodes, please give it a like. This helps promote them to like-minded viewers like yourself. Today's episode is a bit obscure unless you've lived in Calgary for some time. The Beveridge Block, once located on 7th Avenue and 1st Street Southeast, was badly damaged in a fire in December 1986. Demolition of the remaining structure took place over several weeks in the late spring of '87. Constructed in 1912, the six-story Beveridge building at 138 7th Avenue Southeast housed small businesses, lawyers, physicians, real estate, and mortgage companies, in addition to offices for the Allen Line Steamship Company, Western Supply and Equipment Limited, Canadian Western Natural Gas, the Canadian Importing and Distributing Company, and Riley and McCormick Limited. The basement offered a quaint space for Calgary's first self-serve cafe in 1912. At the street, storefronts were outfitted with awnings and large plate glass display windows, while the perimeter of the building was illuminated. The upper levels of the building would be converted to residences, the Beveridge Apartments, by the 1970s. The building was showing its age by the 1980s and became a serious safety hazard when in 1983 bricks and stones from the parapet fell onto 7th Avenue, cutting LRT wires in the process. The view today is no longer possible as we are standing somewhere on the third floor of the middle of the TELUS Convention Center, and the former site is just a surface parking lot. The second part is a visit to the Radio Studios in the former Nielsen Block on 8th Avenue, now part of the TELUS Convention Center. This was after the major renovation after the block suffered an arson fire on April 27, 1987. Radio has its roots back to 1972 when the then Calgary Cable Television had an after-hours audio service using one turntable and a television studio. This operated for almost a year. The idea of community television was a new vision at the time, and for this new idea, the main problem seemed to be that no one seemed to want to use the television facility to develop programming. It was thought that a radio service might help because radio offered some evidently needed privacy and obscurity for potential programmers. A small studio was built and operated on Cable Channel 6 and Cable Channel 105.1. This became a popular service, playing music from a purchased library, and began to get audience attention. There was only CHFM operating on FM in 1973, and it programmed easy listening. The radio service was called Radio Cora, and Radio Cora played rock, folk, blues, classical, jazz, using cable television employees. The fledgling station was threatened with extinction because of cost cutbacks, and it was agreed that the frequency could be made available if interested individuals built and supplied a signal to the cable company using an off-premise facility. So, Radio Cora became in 1974 independent of the cable company, which agreed to maintain the frequency licensing arrangements. Radio Cora was an organization of people who had grown up with radio or had grown to love working with radio. It was felt that cable had the potential to be a great future in radio and television. In television, this turned out to be true, but not with radio. The radio service of cable has remained obscure because it just doesn't generate the revenue that television does. The non-commercial artist-run off-center space was now empty as they had relocated after the fire and are now known as the new gallery in Art Central. Radio Cora continued to exist throughout the 70s with numerous CRTC problems because of the fact that cable FM was and is not a recognized form of radio. Regulations focus on broadcast and technical cable FM. With no transmitter, it's not seen as a legal regulatory entity. Eventually, the CRTC gave up trying to get the Rocky Mountain Radio Society to apply for the necessary license and filed all information under experimental, almost but not quite a pirate station. In 1977, Radio Cora became Radio, to reflect a change in focus from community to alternative. The naming was more than just a reference to the Elvis Costello song, as station manager Dennis Burton explained years later. Radio members loved music and felt that radio was the ideal vehicle to portray a variety of obscure music that, despite proliferation of on-air FM, continued to receive little to no airplay. Funding the station was an ongoing problem, since it was felt that commercials, as a form of funding, compromised the necessary breadth and experimental thrust of musical directions explored on the station. This lack of funding caused an evolution in equipment use and operational practice which became unique to Radio. Dennis Burton was an integral, lifelong part of Radio, essentially becoming its owner, manager, caretaker, and mentor to many show hosts. His interest in so many diverse and unique subjects and extraordinary deep knowledge in music made him the perfect person to run the station. He was the soul of the station and a friend to many. Sadly, he passed away in 2013. Among the many hosts that plied their craft behind the microphone spinning discs are two names in particular. David Veach, now a writer and editor who spent more than 2 decades at the Calgary Sun reviewing the local music scene. He had a show in the late 80s and early 90s. Eugene Chadbourne is another well-known former DJ. Eugene is an American banjoist, guitarist, and music critic who lived in Calgary in early 1970s to avoid military service in the Vietnam War. He was instrumental in Radio Corps' early days alongside Dennis Burton and others. Returning to the United States, he moved to New York City in the mid-1970s and played free improvisation with Henry Kaiser and John Zorn. From 1985 to 1989, I produced and hosted the Bottom 40 show on Radio, a weekly late-night radio program featuring an eclectic 3-hour show that covered a wide range of music from alt-rock to jazz to punk to whatever I felt like that night. As a bonus, here's some candid and humorous footage of my arriving for one of my on-air shifts in early 1986 with a fisheye lens-mounted high-8 camera. Back in the day, the main floor of the Nielsen Block housed a pawn shop and a small cafe. There's a maze of stairs and hallways to arrive at the studio with a box of albums in hand and a fresh coffee. The anticipation had built up from spending the weekend choosing my 3-hour set of alternative music and obscure albums. Often it was something new to challenge my listeners. Maybe it was a Frank Zappa piece or something from Ralph Records. But I knew the listening audience would enjoy songs until midnight before switching over to the always dependable tape service. Our Revox reel-to-reel autopilot show incorporating the best of from the past year. Despite the 104.3 FM signage, we had recently switched our FM frequency to 104.5. My colleague and fellow DJ, David Saturn, was wrapping up his show, Psychic Children. We usually spent a few minutes with banter while trading places in front of the microphone.
Video machine. Shed some light here.
Shed some light on the situation. Man,
yes.
Now I don't know what to do.
Now we've stumped you, haven't we?
How's that? Not bad to throw you there.
I've muted the sound as I do not have clearances to play the music being heard, but there was the Psychedelic Furs, Midnight Oil, and plenty of other alternative music being played that night. Today, all that remains of the Nielsen Block is a 5-story sandstone facade on Stephen Avenue Mall, which was saved and incorporated into the new convention center.
Well, of course, you're listening to Psychic Children. I'm David Saturn, here till almost 9:30 or thereabouts. Francois will be in with the Bottom 40, a very exciting show, of course. Let's see, what have we been listening to? Dark Room, Broken English, Wolfgang Press, My Life, Flesh for Lulu off their live album, song called Cat Burglar, Dead Can Dance, Trial, and of course the Psychedelic Furs, India. Make sure you listen into Psychic Children every Tuesday, 7:30 to 9:30, and we'll hopefully play.
Today, Radio no longer broadcasts at 104.3 Cable FM, but its show lives on, online, curated by DJ Mary's Web. I hope you've enjoyed this rather colorful, obscure, and quirky bit of Calgary's radio history. And if you enjoyed truly alternative music, you can find many of these old shows at radioradio.ca. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Be kind, and we'll see you next time on Real Life.